Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes. While we wait for everyone to join, tell us in the chat where you're zooming in from today. Ooh, New Orleans.
Greenville, New Orleans, Orlando, Cincinnati, Franklin, Seattle, Indianapolis, Austin, Texas,
Fort Worth, Texas.
Seattle, Slippery Rock, Pennsylvania.
I've never heard of that before.
Oh my goodness. I don't know how far away it is from where I grew up, but it's not too far.
All right, all over. All right, we'll give it about another minute and then we'll get started.
Colorado Springs in the house.
All right, we've got about 70 folks, so let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Leadership's Role in Promoting Workplace Inclusivity. We are delighted to have you join us for Day 3 of NAA's second annual Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Awareness Week. My name is Stephanie Hurst, and I'm the Member Programs Manager for the National Apartment Association Education Institute. Before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping points. This presentation is being recorded and will be posted on the webinars page of the NAA website later this week. During the discussion, you may type questions into the chat box on your screen and we will share them with our presenter. We've also left time at the end for questions. Finally, DE&I Awareness Week is brought to you by Entrada. Next slide, please. Laura Butler, Chief People Officer at Entrada, has sent over a brief video to welcome you today.
Hi, my name is Laura Butler, and I'm the Chief People Officer here at Entrada. We want to welcome you to the NAA's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Awareness Week. On behalf of the entire team at Entrada, we want to thank NAA for showing leadership in creating this forum. We couldn't be more proud to sponsor this event and the important conversations that will be taking place. To find out more about Entrada and our team, please visit entrada.com/careers.
Thank you, Laura and Entrada, for sponsoring this week and today's session. And now I will turn it over to NAA's DE&I Committee Vice Chair, Kara House, to introduce today's wonderful speaker. Kara?
Thanks so much, Stephanie, and welcome back, everyone, for Day 3 of DEI Awareness Week. Today, we have such an important topic as we discuss workplace inclusion.
Hi, my name is...
and how we can cultivate inclusivity to make our workplaces safe and encouraging spaces of belonging for all of our team members. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Ebony Butler. As the current Director of Diversity, Learning, and Development for BGSF, she brings 18 years of learning and development and 7 years of diversity, equity, and inclusion expertise to her current role. Drawing from her lived personal and professional experiences, she is dedicated to the cultivation of safe spaces that allow authenticity, drive creativity, and promote trust and deliver quality performance throughout an organization. Ebony also serves as an adjunct professor for one of the original historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs, Paul Quinn College, where she challenges students to approach business from an equitable and inclusive mindset. Welcome, Ebony.
Thank you. Thank you, Kara. I appreciate that. Alrighty, so first off, I'm extremely excited for this opportunity to work with all of you, and I'm even more excited for the opportunity to learn with all of you today as we talk about inclusivity, particularly in the workplace. I want to start off by sharing with you just this quote, and I'm going to pause and ask, have you ever heard of Dr. Edward Deming? I'm just going to let you think about that. And the reason that's important to me is because probably about 10 years ago, I heard this quote. And when I heard it, I actually have to say it was a little longer than 10 years ago. It probably was about 15 years ago. When I heard this quote, I was thinking, oh, no, that's not me. And the quote I heard was, when things go wrong within an organization, it never falls at the feet of the people. It lands at the feet of the leader. And that was very, very profound to me. And then when I heard it 15 years ago, I was thinking, oh no, things that are going wrong within this team and this organization definitely lie at their feet, not mine. Well, if you know anything about Dr. Edward Deming, he is an American statistician, a consultant, and he really was kind of marked as the godfather of the total quality management system. He's really responsible for working with Japanese leaders after the ruins of World War II to transform their economy to being like the second largest in the country. And when he worked with them, not only was it a priority to look at processes, to look at procedures, it was an even more priority to look at leading. How are we leading today? And so I'm always excited to have these conversations. But I want to ask you a question. Did you know that social exclusion is a psychologically painful experience? As a matter of fact, neuroscience research has shown that being left out of a social circle lights up the same areas of the brain as the experience of physical pain. Seemingly minor acts of exclusion can have a detrimental impact on employees. And even though we hear that, we're going to spend some time today talking about how that really shows up and how it truly does impact our teams and our employees. Social exclusion is relatively common, believe it or not. I know that you've never experienced this before, and or maybe you've never felt like you've excluded anyone. And we can all, I bet, agree that there's been a moment in time where there was a level of exclusion. And so it's quite normal, a lot more normal than we think, particularly in the workplace. And then did you know that being ignored at work has a stronger impact on your physical and mental well-being than even bullying? Now, I know that none of us on this call were ever bullied, and we probably were never even the bullier. And I will say that I can remember back in the 5th grade, back in the 4th grade, back in the 3rd grade, moments where I felt bullied, and exclusion at work is more of a mental and physical impact than that. And so today we're going to talk about defining and recognizing exclusion in the workplace. I truly believe that a lot of this is unintentional. We're going to also understand how to transition towards an inclusive workplace. That's where we want to be. We want to be in a workplace where we're able to be innovators, we're able to be creative, we're able to provoke thought in ways that's going to really enhance and drive marketable excellence and excellent performance. We also want to uncover traits that drive inclusion at work. So we're going to talk about what are some of those key traits that if we just say, I'm going to focus on this one, it's going to really help to drive inclusion in the workplace. And then we're going to round out with applying inclusive behaviors to drive employee satisfaction and performance. We're going to spend some time talking about that as well. And so let me ask you, and I'm going to pause, and I would love for you to just kind of put a couple of words in the chat. When I say workplace exclusion to you, what does that really mean? So I'll just take a couple of seconds. What does workplace exclusion mean? And I'll pause and give you a chance to put a few responses in the chat. And guess what? I didn't give you enough time to do that, but I will pause and ask Kara if anything showed up in the chat on workplace exclusion.
Yeah, we're getting a couple answers now. So someone said isolation. We have leaving people out of projects or events, not providing access to the same information or opportunities as others. This is a good one. Groups going out to lunch together, working on assignments together, knowing each other, not being involved, all for one for all, being left out of decisions that affect my job in my office, no recognition or including a variety of people, or I think not recognizing or including a variety of people. And we're getting some more as well.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Kara, and keep them coming. And so you all pretty much have summed it up. Workplace exclusion is when we ostracize some employees, exclude them from social gatherings and work activities. And while this seems natural, socially, excluding employees can leave some people feeling like they're alone at work. And one note to add is that a lot of us probably even feel alone at home. And so when we come to the place where we spend majority of our time, that's even more of an overwhelming impact when we also feel alone at work. Having no one to talk to and no one to help them if they ever needed it. That is what workplace exclusion is about. And so I want us to think about how might you feel when you're excluded? I want us to dial back just a moment, and I want you to think about a time you felt excluded. This could be personally or professionally. Think about that time. And as you're thinking about that time you felt excluded, I would love for you to think about what was the situation? What was happening? Who were you hoping would include you? Why do you feel they should have included you? And then the emotional piece I want us to tap into right now is how did you feel? So if you can put that in the chat, a moment in time when you felt excluded, how did you feel? And I'll pause and allow you a chance to respond. And then once we have a few responses, Kara, I would love for you to share some of those feelings.
Absolutely. We've got hurt, alone, alienated, frustrated, started with sadness and led to resentment and anger, confused, not valued, annoyed. Someone said that they're on a housing board and when they say something, crickets, but when someone else says what they just said, praise and recognition. Isolated, inadequate, alienated, invisible, defeated.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Most of you have said these things. You feel sad. You feel alone. You might feel a little anxiousness, depressed even. I know we don't want to admit it, but maybe a little bit of enviousness. We feel rejected, angry, disappointed even. What was the result of that feeling? What did you begin to do or stop doing? If we could truly be transparent, what was the result of that feeling and the way you showed up at work? Let's go ahead and chat a few of those responses. So if you felt alone, did you do anything differently? Maybe not, but maybe you did. If you felt anxious, what was the result of that feeling as it relates to how you showed up at work? And I'll give you some time to chat that in the response.
Yeah, we had someone say that they felt that they just don't matter. A lot of disappointed, disengaged, avoidance, quiet quitting. They started looking for other jobs, stopped trying to connect with others. They spoke to HR. They reached out to those people less and said something to their boss. Someone said they retreated. Someone said they didn't want to rock the boat and they didn't want to be considered just sensitive.
Yeah. Thank you, Kara, for sharing that. A lot of great talents, great work, great ideas, potential innovation has now gone out the window because we did not feel included. And so now let's explore, and I heard some of you say some of these pieces on how exclusion shows up at work, but I would love for you to chat a few more ways that exclusion typically shows up at work. I did hear a couple earlier. I heard it mentioned that, you know what, maybe I say something, but then and it's crickets, but when someone else says it, it's a lot of recognition. You know, I'm not invited to go to lunch with these people. You know, maybe I don't get the information like other people. So give me some other examples on how exclusion shows up at work.
This is a really interesting one. They said groups break up when you walk up. Someone said not being considered for promotions when compared to someone else, not providing the same opportunities for career development. Certain people are promoted over others.
That's really good, really good. And here are some that we have. And I am going to, I'll go over these, but I do want to share some additional elements around some different biases that typically show up at work that will also drive this level of exclusion. So one of them is being avoided or ignored by coworkers. And I liken that to everyone's in a group having a good time and all of a sudden I walk up and then the group disperse. Not being invited to employee social functions and not even being invited to lunch. Failing to receive notification for important meetings. Wow, that is a really a big deal, and that is the quick clue that you are not a part of the group. Others withholding vital procedural information from you is another way that exclusion typically shows up. People ignoring your intra-company communications. I know that's never happened to anyone on this call, but whenever your intra-company communications are being ignored, that's another example of being excluded. And with that, I want to share with you a couple of biases that typically come to mind. And I will also say that these biases sometimes are unintentional, they're unconscious. And so when you think about maybe not being invited to certain social functions or social groups, I think about similarity bias. And similarity bias is when we just typically prefer people who look like us and remind us of ourselves. Similarity bias most obviously, you know, creeps up when decisions are being made about people. So it could be maybe who you go to lunch with, who you bring onto the team, who you promote. And so all of that is around similarity bias. So that's one that definitely keeps exclusion happening within the organization. But then one other one I really want us to think about, particularly now since we work in a hybrid environment and or totally remote environment, we have to be cognizant of distance bias. We have to be cognizant of distance bias because that is another way we exclude people. Because distance bias is about us kind of tapping into people who are closest to us. Let me give you an example. The two of us work in the office, but the other 4 people are remote. If you have that approach or that structure within your organization or within your team, I highly encourage you to begin to think about, man, how can I help my people that are remote to feel included? You know, and so that is one of the ways that exclusion shows up as well. So how do we begin to create this shift? Because we've spent the whole first half talking about being excluded. So how do we start to transition this? How do we start to transform the way we think, to shift our mindset so we can truly start to behave and show up in different ways? Let's spend some time talking about that. That goes into remote workers, sorry. And then those unconscious biases. Inclusion. So inclusion is about, a workplace environment that makes everyone feel valued while also acknowledging differences. I'm going to say that again. It is a work environment that makes every employee feel valued while also acknowledging their differences. What keyword stands out to you? Just put it in the chat, just on that first one. What keyword stands out to you? And Kara, if any showed up, if you would read those out, that'd be perfect.
Yeah, we have differences, value.
Yeah.
Someone said also, every employee
Yeah.
valued, differences, valued, i.e. belonging, acknowledgement, every.
Yeah. This is all about equity. It's all about equity. And what I mean is that I think a lot of the learning we received, even going through leadership development trainings probably 10 years ago, 15 years ago, even probably 8 years ago, a lot of what we talked about was equality and how to provide the equal everything for everyone. And what I love about inclusion is that it goes so much deeper than equality. It's really about equity. It's really about, how do I make a connection with this person on my team, or one of my peers, or one of my clients, or one of my customers, or one of my friends? How do I really build a connection with them so that I can acknowledge, leverage, and love their differences, so I can truly make sure that they know they are welcomed and included? And so in order to do that, we have to really get a chance to know people. And so it truly is about equity. We have to appreciate differences and understand these differences contribute to the organization's culture and business outcomes. If we were all sitting around and we look the same, talk the same, feel the same personality, same experiences, guess what? We have a very boring work environment. And so the great thing about inclusion is really leveraging and appreciating differences. And when I say differences, I'm not just talking about skill sets. I'm talking about where you're from. I'm talking about how you were raised. I'm talking about ethnicity. I'm talking about, I'm right-handed, you're left-handed. I'm talking about everything that makes you different. We have to value it, because those differences will help us to be able to connect with our clients, with our trusted advisors, with our partners, with our consultants, with our customers, in a way that drives equity, which is giving people what they need in order to be successful versus just giving everyone the same thing. Also, inclusion is about how well contributions and perspectives of different groups of people are valued and integrated into the work environment. And so it's not enough to just have a seat at the table. We really have to have a voice that's heard and leveraged at the table as well. So I'm going to pause and I'm going to ask you, what key insight comes to mind for you right now, just based on everything we've talked about so far? I just want to do a pulse check. Any key insights come to mind? If you'll put them in the chat, give you a moment. And then Kara, if there's anything there, I would love to hear.
Absolutely. While we're waiting, because it might take some folks a minute to type something, but I'll just say, I love what you just said about not just having a seat at the table, but having a voice and having it valued at the table. That's such an important distinction. April just said unique perspectives integrated into the work environment is so important. We have to stay mindful and never make coworkers feel this way, sad, hurt, or angry. Jay says the key insight is profit. It is that it profits a business to be inclusive, but I also really want us to focus on it because it's the right thing to do. Social corporate responsibility.
Yeah, thank you. Alrighty. So let's flip the coin. Let's talk about inclusion. Let's talk about it even more, because to Jay's point, there's definitely value in inclusion. So here are some of the impacts: higher revenue growth, greater readiness to innovate. And one of the reasons is because we're more agile. We have leveraged, and as leaders, we understand the strengths and the opportunities of everyone on our team. And so when we are moving in the right direction, we're moving. And when we recognize that we have a roadblock or an obstacle, we know how to shift quickly by leveraging another skill set that's on the team. Increased ability to recruit a diverse talent pool. And the reason for that is because one thing I always share with people is that a lot of times we are so goal-oriented and goal-driven as people. And I think that we focus a lot on diversity, 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 diversity. I have to have this, I have to have this, I have to have that. I encourage us to focus on inclusivity. When you focus on inclusivity, diversity comes. It comes to you automatically. When people see that you lead in a way that's inclusive for all, guess what? All people want to come and be on your team. And so it definitely increased ability to recruit from a diverse talent pool, because instead of us having to go out there and say, hey, we're diverse, we're diverse, we're diverse, guess what? People can see it when they look at us. They can see it when they look at our web pages. They can see it when they look at our social media posts, and they hear about it because employees within the organization feel it. And so it automatically brings a diverse slate of candidates. And then 5.4 times higher employee retention, because employees feel like they're being challenged. They get to learn from people who have different experiences, different perspectives, and they're continuing to grow in that process. And then also 9.8 times more likely to look forward to going to work. Most people are, because they feel included. They feel welcome. They feel appreciated. 6.3 times more likely to have pride in the work that they do. And the reason they have pride in the work that they do, because their leader is able to connect their work to the overall purpose of the organization and help them to see how their skill set, their strength, really does help to grow the business. 5.4 times more likely to want to stay a long time at their company. And then I heard someone mention earlier this thing of quiet quitting. And so it'll solve that. And the reason I say it solves that is because, let me just say this: quiet quitting is not when people really quit their job. What they do is they quit on the idea of going over and beyond. They start to put up a lot of boundaries to how they work and how they approach work. And guess what? They're putting up those boundaries because even mentally they are putting up boundaries. And if they are putting up boundaries and suppressing their mental capacity to be innovative, you're going to get the bare minimum. And when we as leaders show up and truly be inclusive and show that we really care, we need to hear your ideas. We want to implement your strategies. We want to talk more about your solution. It's going to help to tap into that discretionary effort that we have to tap into in order for employees to go over and beyond. And so I want to turn it over, and I love to talk about this. Some of you probably have seen this. This is actually from Deloitte, and I love this. This is the 6 signature traits of inclusive leadership. And I will tell you that if you focus on these 6 key signature traits, it'll help you to truly show up and be an inclusive leader. So the first one is curiosity. And curiosity is about, highly inclusive leaders have an open mindset, a desire to understand how others view and experience the world, and a tolerance for ambiguity. Let me say this. In order to be effective at curiosity, you have to be a leader that recognizes you don't have all the answers, and you have to be okay with not being the smartest person in the room, and you have to be okay with asking questions, and you have to be okay with listening. Another thing I strongly encourage, if you really want to, really perfect the curiosity piece, is to ask questions and share your thoughts never or last. I'll say that again when I get into collaboration. But to ask questions to understand and share your thoughts never or last. That's curiosity. The next piece is around cultural intelligence. So for inclusive leaders, the ability to function effectively in different cultural settings is about more than just having a mental map of different cultural frameworks. And so it is really understanding similarities and differences, which is really important with cultural intelligence, because not everyone sees the world through the same cultural lens. And so when you can start to learn about other cultures, it'll help you to dismiss prototype bias and stereotyping, because you now have so much more information that's going to help you to truly be inclusive. When I say cultural intelligence, I'm not just speaking about ethnicity or truly like where you're from, how you were raised, which is all important. I'm also talking about recognizing that there are different cultures and subcultures within an organization. That's also going to be very important as well. It's important for you to understand how maybe different generations approach work differently. That goes into cultural intelligence as well. Next, we have collaboration. So being a diverse thinking team is greater than the sum of its parts. You want to make sure that you collaborate. And this is when I say it is so important to share your perspective never, or share it last. The reason I encourage you to share it last is because sometimes as a leader, when you position your response or your thoughts, others will just kind of jump on that bandwagon. And what it prevents is the ability to be innovative and the ability to really get all possible options out on the table. And so you want to be collaborative. You want to focus on collaboration. Another thing about collaboration, though, remember when we talked about having a voice at the table? When you're collaborating, it's so important to stay clear of similarity bias. It's so important to not go and tap on the shoulders of the people you always tap on the shoulders, because more than likely, y'all kind of think alike by now. And so when you're collaborating, it is extremely important for you to tap on the shoulder of people who will think differently from you. That'll also help you to stay clear of confirmation bias. Because confirmation bias allows us to only do business with people who think like us, that have the same perspective. But to stay clear of that, Think of a whole different person that has a different perspective. Bring them to the table and let their voice be heard. Another thing I encourage about collaboration is use the yes and approach so we can continue to build. When you're collaborating, I encourage you to not solve anything. You are truly just getting our thoughts and ideas on the table. Commitment. I love commitment. This is a really good one too. And the reason I love commitment is because when you're committed, you recognize that focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion can sometimes be tough. You recognize that. And you choose to stay the course. Another thing I love about commitment is that a lot of times people will think about their own internal personal values. And those personal values typically will align with the values of the organization they decide that they want to be a part of. And so they're extra committed because of that. Another thing I love about commitment is that it really allows you to show up and be an influential leader and an inclusive leader, because you get a great opportunity to connect every person on your team to their purpose at work. You get to help them to see how, you notice you do a really good job when it comes to delegating and also following up and setting deadlines and timelines. This is so important and a great skill because it'll help us to do this. So when you're committed, you connect people to the purpose. You connect them and you make sure that they understand how what they're doing positively and or maybe causes a challenge for where you all are trying to go. And then courage. Because talking about imperfections, involves some personal risk taking. It's just courage is also good, but courage allows us to be vulnerable, and it allows us to remember that we're people and we're human and we're going to make mistakes. The great thing about courage is that it allows you to speak up when normally you wouldn't. If you hear an off comment, if you hear something, that just doesn't sound right, maybe a microaggression, maybe, you see something that just doesn't look right and it doesn't feel right, you're willing to speak up about it. Maybe you hear people saying something about one employee, but that employee is not there. You're willing and you're courageous enough to step up and say something. But another thing I love about courageousness is that it truly does allow you as a leader to show up vulnerable and to admit, hey, this is not my wheelhouse. I rely on you heavily for this. It allows you to do that. And I'll tell you, when you start doing stuff like that, people will love working for you because they get it and they understand and they know that you need them just as much as they need you. And then cognizant. This is more of cognizant of biases. And so you're just aware of biases. And you don't, you stay connected to the understanding about different biases so that you can be very intentional about dismissing and or minimizing or mitigating those biases. With cognizance, it's also even some accountability that comes into play, because maybe you know that you have a similarity bias. Maybe you share it with someone you can trust and you ask them to hold you honest and to give you feedback on how you're doing. Another thing about cognizant is that it involves a lot of learning. So you read books, you listen to TED Talks, you listen to different podcasts, but you do a lot with cognizant and cultural intelligence to learn a lot about yourself and or others so that you can truly show up and be an inclusive leader. Let me pause and see, what questions do you have? Feel free to put them in the chat.
Seeing any yet?
Okay.
Oh, we just had a question actually. So someone asked, what questions can I include in my conversations to help people be more open to communicate how they feel or their thoughts about something?
Thank you for that. I encourage, and feel free, because I'm not the smartest person in this room. If you all, have some additional feedback, feel free to chat that in the chat as well. And the piece that I would add would be to probably not start with asking questions. It would be you starting with sharing something with them. So just being a little bit more vulnerable with them about whatever that topic is, right? And so I encourage for you to open up and to maybe, kind of lower the barrier some and really be more vulnerable to share something. And oftentimes what I've found is that when we start to share, other people will share with us as well. And so that would be my recommendation for us to start sharing, more based on the topic, just to start sharing more and being more vulnerable. And then I truly do believe that people will notice it and they'll start to follow.
We have another question. How do you express the true need for this training to upper management? And connected to that, we had a separate question come in asking, how important would you say it is to have the top of leadership or company owners get involved in DEI efforts? Should DEI efforts come from the top?
Yes. And so DEI efforts should come from the top. I highly encourage that. It's always easy for a message to trickle down. It's kind of hard for it to go up. And so you have to have that endorsement, sponsorship from the top. From the top, they have to know that DEI is not just something good to do. It is something that we need to do. It is truly a business imperative if we expect to advance our workplace, if we expect to grow our business. And then around like training like this, the way I typically, because that's the space that I'm in. And so I look at a lot of my role is really about provoking thought and shifting mindsets, particularly with diversity, equity, and inclusion topics. Now, my thought, and this is just Ebony speaking, leadership today, any leadership course should have an inclusive lens. I see those to be one. If I say I'm going to a leadership development course, it should be inclusive. And I don't have to spell it out or say it. It should just be that. And based on how things are today, I will say that a lot of what I have to do is to provoke thought. My style is not to shove anything down anyone's throat, because I truly do care about how knowledge is transferred. And I also care about behaviors changing. And the only way that behaviors will change is if I impart knowledge, I provoke thought, I allow people to noodle on it. What's going to happen is that they're going to start researching more cultures. They're going to start understanding more biases. They're going to start applying it to themselves. They're going to get excited. As adults, we get excited when we learn something on our own. So that's like independent studies. So we're learning it on our own. But now that we've learned it on our own, we're so excited about everything we've learned, we're starting to talk about it at the dinner table. So now we're talking about it at the dinner table. Now we're talking about it when we go to brunch with our friends. So we're talking about it there too. And now, after talking about it there and getting additional perspectives, it's helped to cement the knowledge and learning. So now my mindset has shifted. And when my mindset shifts, the behaviors come. And so that's when I truly start to show up differently. And so in short, what I would say as far as the importance of these types of trainings, from my experience, I don't shove it down anyone's throat. I truly do just impart knowledge, how I can and where I can. and I give people enough information to chew on, and then it typically starts to shift how they think, and of course, shift behaviors.
Great. Last question for now. Deborah asked, can you be a hybrid leader of all of the traits depending on the situation?
Oh, most definitely. Yes. So this is what I would encourage. So yes, I do believe that depending upon the situation, you're going to have to flex, right? So, maybe you're hearing that there's something going on within the team environment. So now you're going to have to kind of put on that curiosity hat. You're going to have to put on the curiosity hat. You're going to have to put on the courageousness hat. So I do believe that. And I also, and this is actually for the next piece, I recommend when you think about all of these, I really do recommend you to think about, out of those 6 traits, which one do you feel you do really well? Just one that you feel like you really do very well. But then which one do you feel like, you know what, I can really work on that, and that it's going to be a challenge? You want to work on something, is going to kind of take you out of your comfort zone, so that it's going to be a challenge and to work on that. And so I just encourage to work on one at a time and get really good at one, then move to the next, then move to the next, then move to the next. And then eventually you'll be able to incorporate all of them, and you'll know when to put one hat on, take one hat off, put one hat on, put 2 hats on, and take one off. So yes, I do believe that you can, be a hybrid of using all of those. What else? Any other questions?
That was the last question I'm seeing for now.
Okay. And so as far as, where I would point you is to think about your key takeaway from today's session. What's one of the things you feel you do really well to demonstrate inclusion? What is one area you'd like to improve to be more inclusive? And that can tie into those 6 traits. Then think about, how are you going to do it? So let's just not say, I want to be more curious. I want us to think about, how will you do that? And the first thing could be learn more about being curious. It can go all the way back to the basics. Who will you tell to hold you accountable to be consistent with your progress? And then how will you determine that you've been successful and effective? I'm going to pause because we're at the end, and I just want to hear from you in the chat. One key takeaway from today's session.
While folks are typing, this was just a comment from earlier. Delilah said, I love that thought process. Leadership development should include inclusiveness. And Joella said, encouraged and not alone. Shayna said, great presentation, thank you. Ellen says, inclusion leads to diversity. Courtney said, those we ask to keep us accountable need to have different viewpoints and beliefs. It's not helpful to ask the ones who always agree with us.
Thank you.
Magda said, inclusion is key to success. Christy says, I love the share your thoughts never or last. Jay says, those 6 signature traits, posting those at his desk. Rebecca said, focus on being inclusive and diversity will automatically come. Carly says, not just inviting people to the table, but hearing their voices and valuing what everyone says. Love that thought. Alexis said, focusing on advocacy and inclusion. Dominic says, your comment about provoking thought. As a trans person, sometimes I get frustrated about a lack of progress. And I think that I need to learn to take comfort more in my ability to just provoke thought. Yvette said, everyone can learn and change on how they handle curiosity. Sydney says, I really loved how you said it's not the seat at the table that matters, it is having your voice valued that matters. And Patty says, being an inclusive company drives diversity naturally.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today, and thank you for, being all in and just being, participating with this conversation. And now I am going to go ahead and shift the conversation back to Stephanie.
Thanks so much, Ebony and Kara, for moderating the chat today. Before we end today's session, I just have a few NAA updates that I'd like to share. First, we want to thank you for being with us today. So we do have the NAA DEI Week Challenge. We want you to tell us what you learned during today's session. On any social media channel that you use hashtag NAA DEI Week to share suggestions on how to create more inclusive workplaces. All right, next slide. All right, join us tomorrow at 2 p.m. for our last webinar of DE&I Awareness Week with Jen Picotti and Cameron Shelton and their presentation on building a foundation for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Next slide, please.
Sorry.
Oh, no, you're good. We are pleased to announce that a DE&I bundle is now available on our education platform, Visto. I'll drop that link and a few others into the chat here in just a moment. See. All right, perfect. And we are currently calling for applications for NAA's Diversity Leadership Program and Leadership Lyceum. The deadline to apply for both programs is November 18th. And next Monday, we'll begin accepting applications for the 2023 Excellence Awards and 20 in their 20s class of 2023. Please put these dates in your calendar. We want to celebrate you and recognize you at Apartmentalize in 2023. Thank you again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow for our final webinar of DE&I Awareness Week. Enjoy the rest of your day.